Hello again. We are starting with our first panel of Big Data and AI Forum, which is on data spaces, the topic, and it will be moderated by Ed Curry. Ed Curry is leading researcher in Insight Center of Data Analytics. He is vice president of Big Data Value Association, and most important, he's chairing the advisory board of GATE, and he's really our supporter and close friend, and we can always rely on, and very experienced one. So Ed, please start the panel.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Sylvia. So today we're here to talk about data spaces, and data spaces is one of the most interesting and exciting topics that we have today in the European Union. The data policy is very ambitious when it comes to establishing our common European data spaces, and I think for GATE and for regions in Eastern Europe and Central Europe and Western Europe, North and South, data space is center of our digital infra going forward. So today I'd like to start off with just maybe a couple of quick points on what bases are and why they're so important to us. What are these things that we have to be concerned about, and how can they actually help us? So what is a data space? Well, there's lots of different terminology around at the moment, and fundamentally when we look at space, we look at an ecosystem of data, and there's different types of platforms that are emerging that help support that. Data are a way for us to be able to manage the life cycle of data within our ecosystem, and supported by what we call data platforms. And currently there's a lot of investment going on now in developing these platforms, and we've seen some of the presentations from GATE and some of the work they're doing there as well. And fundamentally, these data platforms will be able to enable data spaces to allow that sharing and exchange of data between organizations and individuals. But when we actually look at the actual deployment of data spaces, well, we know what the common European data spaces are in terms of vision from the Commission. They're quite extensively discussed. But we also have other data spaces that are being created as well. Both of them are at different perspectives in terms of the domains that they look at, and also different scales as well. So they could be European-wide, which is the vision of the Commission, but you can also have ones that are maybe focused around our industry or a particular company. And a good example of that in the aviation industry is the idea of Skywise. So Skywise as a type of data space, a data platform that Airbus have put in place to help support the exchange of data and information between all of their different customers and suppliers across the chain, from the moment a manufacturing partner creates a part for the aircraft through to the construction of the aircraft, the operation of that aircraft with airlines, with airports, and with other travel industry professionals. So a data space can be very much focused on an industry to enable that, or a collection of companies, but we can also have other examples from the airline industry as well, where we data spaces deployed potentially at a single, and what is an example of data space was deployed at Linate Airport in Milan. That airport and the people that run that airport to manage their water and energy management. So a much scale, a localized deployment of a data space, but still support the exchange of information between organizations and individuals to add value and to be able to optimize the energy efficiency and water management within the airport itself. From an academic point of view, this is the classic academic definition of a data space. It comes from Halvey and Franklin and Mayer in 2006. And what they were looking at there is that a data space is not just a data integration approach, but rather it's a data coexistence approach. It's not just about trying to integrate the data, but how do we make it easier for data to coexist with one another within a space? And that includes the ability to be able to share data, to exchange data. So this is the academic definition, and we can see some important elements here in terms of a data space. From a more industrial perspective, at BDVA, we have a definition that we've defined within our European governed data sharing space white paper. And here we have, we'll say, a broader perspective of what a data space is. We see that the data space is an umbrella term that corresponds to any ecosystem of data, models, data sets, ontologies, data sharing contracts. And we're also looking at how those are mixed with the soft competencies that are needed to ensure that the data is exchanged correctly, that it's done within appropriate regulations. So things like governance, social interactions, business processes. So we data spaces is a much broader set of soft competencies together with technical infrastructure as well. And that's very much what our conversation today is going to be about within this panel. I'm delighted to say we have our keynote presentation from Marcos Matassa from the International Data Space Mission, and Mark will tell us about some of the efforts that are taken in ITSA. Following that, a panel discussion where we'll have contributions from Sylvia, from Steph Lorga, and then from Rado as well. We'll talk a little bit about some of their experiences and some of their thoughts on data spaces. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Marcos, who will give us a presentation.
Thank you very much, Edward. Thank you very much, Sylvia. And first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to the Gates Institute for inviting us as IDSA to give the keynote presentation. I couldn't imagine a better introduction. Edward set the scene as regards what exactly are data spaces, and I'm going to give you a presentation of how our organization, International Data Space Association, has contributed in the last year and what is our plan for the upcoming years and period to help build data spaces, which is exactly the title of my presentation. So we are strong believers of data sharing being better than playing alone. So we want to highlight as much as we can the value potential that can be created from sharing data with others. And this is exactly what I want to explain a bit in my presentation today. But first, I want to highlight once again the value that GATE brings together with the other hub facilitators for spreading the word, for transferring the knowledge of data spaces the way International Data Space Associations defines them as GATE. The 8 hubs that have been created, we see also other close friends, for example, VTT, that will also be presenting. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow in this event, but it's a great, and we are very happy that 2 of our hubs and many more do participate, do such events and help let us participate and also help concepts of data spaces go into countries, create new projects and opportunities for other organizations to come close to our conceptions and leverage from sovereign data sharing, as we call the concept of changing data while keeping control of it, of the usage of it. So I would like to start with a bit overview of where we are right now in the evolution of data spaces. International Data Space Association has been dealing with the concepts of sovereign data exchange for the last 5 years. We have participated in many European research projects. We have contributed to the launch of the first like the mobility data spaces that was launched a few months ago, and growing since the day it was announced that it is right now operating. And we've had also a lot of convincing use cases with a big number of industrial partners and research organizations. And it's now time to go for the next step, which is real data space with many data sharing data exchanges, and of course with a clear business impact. Not that the previous one didn't have one, but we want now to bring together all the endeavors that are, let's say, going for a data space solution and bring together in domain data spaces, or allow them to move from a data space to another. And this is actually the greatest challenge and the thing that we want to let's say, help others succeed in the upcoming months. First of all, I will start with this to-do list. So what exactly is IDSA with the reference architecture model that we have defined, looking for? So we are, irrespective of existing technologies and applications, we are talking here about 6 basic functional requirements and the features to be implementing resulting thereof. So we're talking about the trust that data space enables, the security, being able to explain, find, and understand data, but also the standardized interoperability when needed to exchange, and obviously the adding value that have to do with processing of data, and the trade characteristics of data, making data an asset. So this has been defined, and what we are, and this is exactly what has been defined in the last year, with help from IDSA, is the so-called soft infrastructure. So data spaces as a concept can be created in many domains, in many different smaller groups or bigger groups. But what we want to avoid is the creation of silos again. So it's really important that we have an interoperability between the data spaces being created between the different implementation of data spaces, so that they can comply with a set of agreements that have to do with operational and legal aspects of data spaces. So this soft infrastructure has been something that we have been discussing a lot lately, also with the Open DEI design principles paper that the soft infrastructure was first mentioned, and has to do with our idea of data spaces being a sector agnostic concept. So the requirements and functions from different sectors should be met in the overall concept of data spaces. So creating the soft infrastructure as we define it is not a technological challenge. Technologies, as we also will see in this panel, but also as we saw before in the presentation of Ed, the challenge here is how we can combine the different technologies and decide together on a common framework where data spaces will be interoperable, and where we can, in a coordinated way, realize we have some agreed standards and design principles accepted from all participants. So while this has been something that we have done for use cases, is not yet something the new norm. This is our plan to create the data spaces, interoperability and standardization, creating a soft infrastructure that will be invisible to data space participants, and they will just use the functionalities of it to be on their data spaces that they are linked to, and also be able to switch to another data spaces that is of interest, maybe in another domain. An actual company also being related to the logistic topics can transfer to a logistics data space and share data in it to benefit from this data sharing. So we as IDSA have come up future with the reference architectural model, which is our core blueprint for data spaces, with detailed specifications on how to perform this, the sovereign data exchange, as we call it. But next to that, we have what we call a magic triangle, which consists of not only the reference architecture model, but also the certification scheme, which is a third-party conformity that allows added trust and trustworthiness of partners and components in the data space, and the portfolio of open source building blocks that basically brings ideas in commercial setups. Next to that, the IDSA rulebook, basically a book that helps you understand how to implement ideas in the real world. And all this is giving a lot to the world of data spaces in terms of how to enable the interoperability, how to govern a data space, and ensure trust. With all that, we're coming up with a common framework for data spaces. So we have, as I said before, the design principles for data spaces when it comes to how to build data spaces, but we also need a framework that will give an holistic approach on operational legal tech of data spaces and how to operate them. So not only how to build them, but how to operate them and run them. Basically, at the end of the day, this common framework can be used from different data spaces in a way that each data space can get its own customized handbook based on this framework on how exactly this specific data space should be built and run. So what aspects should be covered, what kind of solutions could be used in combination. So as you see on the right down part of the screen, we have some generic building. There are what I said before, the interoperability, trust, data value, and governance aspects of data spaces. And there are different solutions can be used, but what this framework also is planning to make is basically an interoperability between different combination technologies that can be used for different things. So all these efforts and thinking we have brought as IDSA to the Data Spaces Business Alliance, an alliance that was created a few months ago and consists of BDAIF, FIWARE, having exactly the goal of making data spaces happen. And the common framework is one of the first activities that we want to let's say enable with we have operationalized in this alliance. We have a big plan. I think that this is too much detail for this event. We have started and crafted a 100-day plan about how we want to start our activities with the rest of the initiatives being the biggest initiatives in Europe right now, dealing with data spaces. And we've brought all these together with a team of experts within the data DSPA, the Data Spaces Business Alliance, into 7, let's say, important actions to be taken in this 100 days. And we call them the quick wins within the first days, which have to do with the different hubs that all the initiatives have and how they can align. Of course, the architectural coherence between them, the technical architectural coherence, the framework that I just described, and one joint radar. The radar is supposed to be a way to monitor data spaces out that are already promising, and we need to take special care of them to help them go live, or are in different stages and need our help to move forward in the pipeline of being in the position to become data spaces. So we have a specific deployment support that will be activated and will start in the beginning of next year, teaming up for the Data Spaces Support Center and joining data spaces support activities together with a big community of implementation partners that we have with us to do this. So this is the radar, and exactly we can follow here how this can enable, let's say, not only the identification of lighthouse projects, the most important initiatives, the most promising ones, but also enabling the whole matchmaking process. So consortiums and endeavors that are in need of orientation on how they should, what kind of steps they should take next towards bringing their data spaces into the next level for going live with an interpretable solution. So I just forgot to say that this is an open effort already. You can register as a data spaces or in data spaces that you are aware of to become part of the broader DSPA radar, which already as IDSA we will boost with the data spaces that we already know of and we have in our own IDSA radar. As a final thing, I want to mention a matchmaking event for European data spaces. So the Digital Europe program has announced the CSA calls for February, which will be the first efforts for the support actions for creating domain data spaces in very important areas and domains as announced from the European Commission. And we're doing a matchmaking event when you can pitch and bring your expertise together for this European calls that will finally implement the data strategy for the creation of European domain data spaces. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to participate in the panel afterwards to discuss more about all this.
That's great, Marcos. Thanks very much. A very, very insightful presentation and covers a number of important topics. So the next presenter is actually going to be myself, and I'm going to give a little bit of background on some of the activities that BDVA have been doing in this space, and obviously they can be quite relevant what Marcos has talked about in terms of the Data Space Business Alliance. So to kick off, one of the interesting things with data spaces is there's a large number, it's a very, very ambitious concept. And there's a large number of different types of associated and related concepts with it. So we see it as part of the digital strategy that's coming from Europe. And the notion of public-private partnerships and governance in play there. We have, at the other extreme, we have Gaia X, which is a heavily private initiative driven from private industry, very much looking at the specifications that are required to enable federation. We have IDSA, very much focused on interoperability and delivering and making data spaces real. Fireware, very, very strong in the area of technical components, significant open source already released. We have a couple of projects as well, EU Hubs for Data, OpenDAI, which are looking at Hubs for Data, looking at bringing together the ecosystem that's required to make these happen. And then we have BDVA as well, then, who's looking at the challenges around the design, standardization, and also some of these non-technical challenges, which are quite important to us and quite core of what we do. So when we look at the work that we've done in BDVA, well, we recognize that there is a challenge that we have. So we have the concept that we have of developing the ecosystem itself and what makes sense around that. But we also have the need to have concrete experimentation, piloting, and learning of lessons. The key thing with BDVA is also that we have always a very, very clear focus on business value, understanding what's the business value we can get here, what's the societal value that we can get. So our goals in these terms are very clear, and we kind of set those out at the start. But what becomes important as well is that we start to align these concept development, these conceptual ideas that we have coming from the ecosystem, coming from all of those different areas together, so that we have clear understanding of what these concepts are, clear definitions, so that people understand them together. At the same time, we need to be learning from the different practices that come out of actually deploying data spaces and putting them into practice, whether they're internally within a corporation or between different organizations sharing data, or within communities of people or organizations. And by looking at these two things together, we're able to actually learn a lot from the conceptual side, and also have that been informed by the actual practice itself, the real lessons that are being learned. What we found is that the most important thing is trust, and Marcos mentioned this as well, but there's also key other areas that we need to look at as well, things like governance, people, data, technology, and organizations. These are the kind of high-level things that emerged within our TF10 task force on data spaces over the last 2 years as it's been working. And from this, the key things that we identified, we captured them, and we actually communicate them in what we call our data sharing wheel. And this basically identifies the core pillars and principles that are needed to have a governed data space that generates value for different sectors and for society. The core thing I'll point out here is trust is at the center. None of this will work unless there's trust by individuals, trust by organizations, trust by regulators. And by looking at the different pillars that we have here around governance, people, organization, technology, and data, we're able to ensure that we actually can generate value through the creation and deployment of data spaces. When we look down at the details of the data sharing wheel, what we see is that, well, technology becomes very important, so that the technical maturity of the solutions is a very important thing, and it's still very much an area where the actual technologies themselves are being developed and being improved. But there is a good level of maturity around these technologies, as we've seen from the IDSA presentation. But other areas need to be considered as well. Things such as organizational innovation. Does your organization know how to work within a data space, or how to develop a data space to derive benefit directly for that organization or for your customers that are working with? So organizational innovation becomes very important, which is beyond just the technical infrastructure that's required there. And fundamentally, to put any of this into practice, skills development becomes critical. How do we ensure that the people inside our organization and the people inside our partner organizations have the appropriate skills and know-how that are needed to implement and to deploy data spaces, but also to be able to get benefit back from it, to be able to actually derive value from the data space that's been deployed. And this is very much what we look at when we talk about the maturity of design of data spaces. So this is an example from software engineering, which is an area that Sylvia is an expert in, but looking at the notion of having different levels of maturity as we approach our data space capabilities and how we develop them, particularly around that organizational aspect, not necessarily around the technologies themselves, but around the practices and the processes that we have inside our organizations, to understand how do we actually improve the design and deployment of our data spaces, and ensure that our organizations are developing the correct capabilities to be able to leverage data spaces and the benefits from them. Within the idea of maturity models, then, this notion of maturity within organization has been something that's been around for quite a long time, and even beyond the software engineering into the areas of general organizational design and management. And typically these types of maturity levels that we look at things like basic ad hoc implementations of these business processes, right up to proactive and optimized versions of those business processes. So how do we understand the different levels of organizational maturity that we can have for our data spaces? And this is very much at the focus of what we were doing in BDVA. What we wanted to do was to understand, from an organizational point of view, how can we identify low priority or low mature processes within a data space, and high maturity processes for data spaces as well. So typically an organization that has low maturity with their data spaces might have uncoordinated projects. They're all isolated with maybe a lack of coherence, low levels of skills, relying on personnel, key individuals that have the expertise, very much kind of reactive in their strategy and planning towards data spaces, having things like vague metrics, low resourcing, static kind of approaches. This would be kind of what we say is a low maturity organization. Whereas a high maturity organization for a data space would have coordinated data space activities across the organization. They have high levels of expertise that's actually spread across teams, not about individuals. You have that organizational wide coverage of that expertise. They're very much proactive in their strategy. They're looking for opportunities. How can we use and how can we innovate with our data space as opposed to just waiting to react to opportunities? They have meaningful metrics, they have efficient resourcing, and they have a comprehensive understanding of how they can benefit from an innovation point of view from leveraging their data space. And this has been the work that we've been doing inside BDVA to understand this from an organizational perspective. So what we've done is we've taken our data sharing wheel, we've taken this notion of an organizational maturity model, and we've started to develop the best practices that are required along these different elements. The key thing here is that there's a little bit of technology in here in terms of high-level enablement, but primarily this maturity model is focusing on things like organizational design, business processes, and are required to be able to actually implement this and to be able to effectively work with your data space. So very complementary to some of the other activities that are very technology-centric in their focus. What we're now working on is basically an assessment process that helps organizations understand where they are in terms of their data space maturity. So defining the scope and goals of their maturity, understanding where they currently are in terms of their capability, and then trying to develop a capability roadmap to understand how they can develop that capability over time and how they can assess and improve those capabilities for data spaces. As Marco said at the start, the key movement in this space is the Data Space Business Alliance. It's bringing together all of this expertise from all of these organizations that are out there today, and we're feeding in our expertise in the area of this maturity model into the activities of the Data Space Business Alliance as well. So it's a real fantastic opportunity for us to bring all of this work together from the different organizations. And that's basically a quick summary of what we have within BDVA in terms of developing maturity models and the work that we've been doing on developing our data sharing wheel for data spaces. So with that, what I'll actually do is to pass over to our next speaker, who will be Sylvia, who might give a little bit of reflection about what data spaces mean for Gate and everyone in Sofia. So Sylvia, I shall pass over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. It's a lot of information and it's very valuable, and a lot of association. We ourselves are confused at the beginning with so many associations, and now it's good that they created the alliance, the Big Data Business Alliance. So it's one-stop shop where we'll find different ingredients for our for data spaces we intend to develop in Bulgaria. We started with. It's my presentation. We started with the membership with the International Data Space Association because, as you've heard, we are working on interoperability. So it's something which we are creating expertise in, and we are following the Big Data Value Task Force 10 about this. So as such. Facilitator for International Data Space Association. Our role at the beginning is to be as a business provider to consult different organizations and to create together this added value, these business models. And also to educate and to bring awareness to people, to share data and to build this trust between organizations and between people, which is a very important first step towards next activities. Also, our role is, as a hub, is to facilitate the acceleration of international data space technologies adoption, not only the business cases which we will identify, but the technologies adoptions through providing this technical expertise, which again we're creating this knowledge and competencies ourselves, and having in mind this international data space architecture, components, application and implementation, either ready components components or according to the specification which we need to develop ourselves for realization of this either industrial or public or together data spaces. And by advancing this International Data Space Association reference architecture and implementing these respective components, the spaces will be realized as a safe environment, which are guaranteeing that availability, integrity, sovereignty of data sources, and this providing such advanced security mechanisms that are important for industry really to trust and to be involved and to become a data provider. So being such a hub facilitator, we know about these 5 steps to implementation in the data spaces. So in the first 2 steps currently in Bulgaria, where we are having different workshops or dedicated meetings with different stakeholders, either from government, municipalities, from big companies and small and medium enterprises, where to get knowledge and to find their role in the data space, either to be on supply side or to be on the demand side or to be implementation partners, because there are a lot of roles and stakeholders involved in such a data space. And also to create the data sharing use case. So what is the added value to different stakeholders? And after that, to build or to buy the necessary components. So we are following and aware and using some of the fireware components available, and also we are in the process of definition of additional components which we need to develop, which we part of Gate platform. So we are currently in these first 3 steps, both together, Gate and our partners and the different stakeholders in the country. And next steps will be to prepare and to certify those components and reference architecture, which we'll implement in a testbeds provided by the International Data Space Association, and finally to successfully run such data space. As we've heard that there are a lot of legal and business other issues which how to operate this data space, and what will be the security and other legal issues for sharing data. And as a first step and example in Bulgaria, which is based on our work in this digital twin project, and what we presented also at the Big Data Value Association Forum. So based on this, our aim is to realize a data space which will allow collection, processing, aggregation, and sharing data from the city. We start from the city, and as the previous speakers mentioned, it could be extended and connected with different other data spaces, either energy, either mobility, skills, and others, which are currently emerging in Europe. Tourism, and there are 8-10 different fields which are already defined for future data spaces. And it will be based on understanding the data as a key to inform decision making for different organizations. Also the example Ed made about the companies inside, which are created inside the data space, and also to the valuable, the data to be a valuable resource for innovation and development. So sharing data, it will be a place for innovation for smart and SMEs and other startups and other companies based on this data. And so we would like to and to have conversations already with public, private organizations, public and private data, citizens' data, different sources, providers of data in different areas such as urban and air cleanliness. So we are having data from Meteorological Institute about the weather. We are having data from Environment Agency about the air quality, which we are collecting. also from Statistical Institute about about demographic data in the city, from Urban Mobility Center about the mobility in the city, and main data are from Sofia municipality about the built environment to set this digital twin. And all those data from different sources we already have are connected and could be used in different use cases, which we are defining and extended, and would like to involve more stakeholders to have additional added value, not only from the organizations which are providing data and citizens, but also others. So these are our first steps towards data space in Bulgaria, and the next speakers from Bulgaria will provide different perspective from government and from industry on this, and hope that as such facilitator in Bulgaria, we will continue to raise knowledge about big data, about data spaces, and we'll start really with the data from the city, which there are a lot of public data also, and with the creation of this City Living Lab, which we are start establishing now, we will collect even more data, and it will be a good example and a pilot project for bigger data space in Bulgaria, and to connect it with already existing data spaces for better use. So that's from my side for now, and I will be happy to participate in the discussion.
That's great, Sylvia. Thanks very much. So, as you said there, we're going to now hear from two stakeholders within the local regions. First, we're going to get the government perspective from Svetlorga Krukov, and he is from SEGA. So, Svetlora, do you want to kick off with your intervention?
Sure. Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Svetlogor Kirov, head of data unit at State e-Government Agency in Bulgaria. Thank you for the invitation to the Second Gate Big Data and Artificial Intelligence Forum, and the opportunity to present the government perspective relating data spaces initiative and data sharing policy. Because of the time frame, I will skip my personal story about the puzzles. So I want to say that the challenge now faced worldwide is to continue to assemble the data sharing jigsaw puzzle at a rapid pace through developing strategies and using different techniques, technologies and methods, even if sometimes we have to rely on the trial and error method. During my short introduction on this initiative this afternoon, I will provide you with some lessons learned from past activities, opportunities and challenges in the pathway of building and developing data governance and sharing policy, as well as the next steps that the government plans to implement in the field of data as a key capital of society. In the context of the hot news that the Council of the EU and the European Parliament reach a provisional agreement on the Data Governance Act as an important component of the European strategy for data, I would like to emphasize on the following key takeaways, which should be not only lessons learned from the past 10 years of delivering digital public services and opening public data, but also key factors for successful digital government transformation and a new business model for data intermediation. The first takeaway, the implementation of a broad spectrum of different and inconsistent approaches, techniques and technologies to the public sector digitalizations unfortunately led to partial and rather fragmented outcomes. To ensure success, strong and appropriate leadership and government structures are necessary within the public bodies. The strategic asset in the digital industry is the human resource, or more specifically, people who are willing to adapt and learn how to work with new technologies. According to the latest European Commission e-Government benchmark report, Bulgaria's result in this particular indicator is at the bottom of the scale. Less than 1/3 of Bulgarians have at least basic digital skills, against 56% average in Europe. Only 11% have basic IT skills, and IT specialists take only 3.3% of people employed between the ages 15 and 74. Should we are to improve our performance in the next decade, the top priority for strategic management must be improving these numbers. The third one, incomplete and inefficient use of the user-centric model and regular consumer needs a new assessment, which includes a whole spectrum of consumers, public administration, business, NGOs, academia, citizens. We all know that the data is an essential resource, as already all said, and when we create data-driven applications which will benefit citizens and business in many ways, we should first identify, assess, and meet a variety of customer and market needs. It is also clear that the future expectations should consider multi-stakeholder governance schemes for the different data spaces. Despite the regulations and requirements in recent years, interoperability between systems is not yet fully achieved. Same goes for registers and technological solutions for fulfilling the potential of a digital transformation of the public and research sectors. It is important to have an effective ex-ante and ex-post controls in order to ensure compliance with the principles and requirements in the development and deployment of the data spaces. The activities we are talking about cannot be improved without a national interoperability reference architecture aligned with the European one. Such project is currently underway, and another one is due to be launched next year in relation to the development of horizontal geospatial information architecture. The second project is in line with the European Commission ELISE project. This project is dedicated to the location interoperability solutions and the results of the work of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. This brings us to the next slide. Let me try to address some challenges we might face and opportunities we should grasp in the context of data governance and data sharing policy. First, at legal perspective, setting up one of the challenges, already a lot of challenges were mentioned, but now I will give my perspective. Setting up legal obligations and clear conditions when it comes to sensitive data and considering contractual obligations, including property rights governing data collection, aggregation, use, and disclosure, and this versus the opportunity for creating better and balanced regulation toolbox, which does not hamper but stimulates innovation and research activities in the field of data sharing. At cultural perspective, implementation of working data governance principles to guide responsible data ownership and stewardship, and also supporting a culture where sharing and management of data are part of standard practice and overcoming the fear that data can be misused or misinterpreted. This versus the opportunity for building trust, already mentioned. This is the most important thing in the deploying the data spaces, building trust, putting the individuals and companies who generate data in the driving seat so they remain in control of the data they create. At financial perspective, a reluctance to invest on data sharing because these financial costs are high and might not have an immediate return or quick visible results, and also avoiding real or perceived financial conflicts of interests, versus the opportunity for using and combining investments and funds from the EU budget, including from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, from the national budgets, and the private sector contribution. At technical perspective, cybersecurity challenges in the context of storing less data in data centers and more data spreading in a pervasive way closer to user at the edge, and also not enough maturity in syntactic and semantic interoperability layers, also language barriers, especially for the Bulgarian language, versus the opportunity to enable new emerging technologies, data-driven business, and software architecture models and next generation applications and solutions. And finally, I'd like to present to you the next steps we have considered and should be undertaken. What are the European and national funding programs currently available? Are there any projects initiated or planned under these programs? Signed and planned partnerships, expected results and prototypes we can apply to. Let's start with the funding instrument. Next Generation EU. Its core is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. The funds under this instrument will be distributed according to national recovery and resilience plans. The Bulgarian plan, which is still assessed by the European Commission, consists of 59 investment projects and 46 reforms, which will give Bulgaria's economy, industry and business a push for development towards a highly productive economy, thus creating value-added products. Part of the project which would contribute to data governance and sharing policies and activities are in the field of healthcare, digital skills, environment, climate, and Green Deal public sector. And you can find these projects on the website nextgeneration.bg. Maybe I should mention the public sector projects, technological tool for better strategic planning and management of the implementation of national strategy documents, establishment of a national complex center and network for monitoring, control and management, integrated national cybersecurity system in the Republic of Bulgaria, and digitization of data in the administration containing registry data and digital certification from all registers. The responsible public administration for the last three projects is the state government agency. The program under which Bulgaria will mainly implement the building and development of national data spaces is the Research, Innovation and Digitalization Program from Smart Transformation, which will be funded through the EU cohesion policy. There we can find specific objective to uptake the benefits of digitalizations to citizens, companies and governments. And priority area 1 is the data as a key capital of society. As the program has not yet been finally approved by the European Commission, I will only mention a few main measures under which we will propose specific projects next year. Increasing of the interoperability and quality of data in the public sector and business. Expansion of the volume and improving the quality of open and spatial data. Building a centralized infrastructure and technological tools for depersonalization and anonymization of sensitive data and creating conditions for their use by citizen, business and academia. Development of reliable, functional and accessible cloud infrastructure and cloud services. Another step in the pathway is creating strategic partnerships. We have already signed such an agreement with GATE, and we have upcoming strategic partnerships with Sofia Plan. This is a municipal enterprise in charge of the spatial and strategic planning of Sofia municipality. And also Sofia Development Associations. This is a resource center for research, analysis, innovations, and experiment, which creates conditions and encourages the constant dialogue between civil society, business, and Sofia municipality, also academic institutions. The main objective of these agreements is to join forces in order to build new models for interaction between higher education, municipality, civil society, and public administration. We also hope to develop and enrich the forms and content of existing partnership models with common aim of facilitating and promoting cooperation in activities such as the building and development of data spaces. That brings us to the end of the presentations. I'd like to summarize it by saying that the government role in data governance and sharing policy is really important, and it should be recognized by the responsible digital-minded leaders, because the most important responsibilities every government has towards its citizens are ensuring qualitative and future job-related education and ensuring privacy for all citizens and protecting their data. Thank you very much. And thank you for your feedback.
Thank you very much, Svetlorgo. I'm very impressed with the level of sophistication and the level of thought that's gone in Bulgaria into actually defining your program, your partnerships. The partnership with Gate is obviously very important, but I think it's very, very impressive, and I'm not sure we're as advanced as that within Ireland, at least. So I think you're doing something very well down. So our next step is to look at a private sector stakeholder from Bulgaria as well. So we're going to have Rado Rizov from Telelink, and Rado is going to give us the perspective from the private side with his intervention. Rado, over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Ed. Thank you all. My name is Radoslav Rizov, and I'm the Strategic Projects Lead at Telelink Business Services. I think we are slightly ahead of the schedule, so I'm going to just give you two examples for a value creation out of the data spaces. I don't have a set presentation, and I'm going to keep it short just for more time to be allocated for the discussion. The first example is called vehicle to grid, which is a concept that we've been elaborating and working on. The idea behind is that it will allow us to balance grid through returning energy back to the network from our electricity vehicles on times when there is a high consumption, like late night, for example. The idea has been circulating around for maybe 10 years already, but unfortunately, one of the main blockers that has been is the absence of data to be analyzed and used by the stakeholders. The concept in general may exist in and scale up in the context of data being shared between different authorities within a smart city or a mobility data space. Alongside the chain, we have electricity providers, which are the data owners and providers, charging stations, and households and citizens, data providers, on-demand electricity vehicles, universities and academia, which are analyzing the data, payment processor, and of course, governmental authority regulating the entire cycle. In practice, this is a paradigm shift towards a totally new business model that is born out of the data being shared between multi-domain stakeholders. It benefits all stakeholders as it balances the grid, saves money to the electricity operator, citizens earn money, operators of e-vehicles also optimize their bills, and lastly, we save the environment. Additionally, a new technology startup may also arise, which will eventually manage the relationship between the different actors, how the citizens are paid for the electricity, the amount of electricity returned to the grid, electricity operators, etc., etc. Another example is how the of an energy data space will be of a benefit for new business model creation is the ability to receive time data for your energy consumption. This is currently not happening in most of the EU member states due to different regulations, but in general we believe that there is a high potential of having this data at hand and correlating it with, for instance, the energy passport of your building and apply for a bank loan, for instance. There is a potential room for a technological startup also that will manage the entire process and support the data analytics process and comparison between different households and buildings. On the other side, such an initiative will also give municipal authorities ability to access data of energy consumption in real time of their public buildings, compare it and correlate it to the data with other data sources such as emission of CO2 in the atmosphere. The data will also be used for update of existing policy measures for buildings, energy efficiency improvement in the long term. Of course, none of this can happen without the existence of a respective data space, or if it does, it will be a small-scale pilot. We are currently preparing such a project, and we will be very glad to share if it succeeds, manage it within a data space. In general, this also fits in the EU Green Deal aspiration and commitment towards European being the most environmental friendly continent. So these are just a quick two examples of a low-hanging fruits, how we can utilize the existence of EU data spaces, and companies like ours are very much looking forward with high hopes and expectations of the EU data spaces. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much, Rado. So I'm going to kick off the questioning. We have about 7 or 8 minutes to have a brief chat. I'm going to go back to Marcus, because Marcus has, through IDSA, they're working across Europe with lots of different organizations, different regions, trying to build data spaces in different sectors. So I'm going to give Marcus the hard question. We've seen what's happening here now in Sofia and in Bulgaria. What do you think are the key kind of challenges that they're going to face based on your experience of seeing data spaces evolve in different parts of Europe? What do you think are the key challenges that need to be overcome or that they need to look at initially?
Thank you very much, Ed. I think, first of all, we have the challenge that everybody right now entering the world of data spaces is facing to understanding the real value. So we have to enable these mechanisms like the maturity models that you presented or other tools that might be out there and bring them together under a framework that would allow organizations and endeavors to, first of all, understand the business value and what exactly solutions they would need when entering the data space world. And next to that, it's exactly what I mentioned before, the fact that some of these efforts might look, let's say, easy to start with, but if they don't lead into interoperable solutions, this will create once again a silo, and this is exactly what we want to avoid. And I find this as a key challenge of our times right now. And exactly the creation of our alliance is something that will try to tackle this, and hopefully we'll end up with interoperable solutions.
Sure. So if I hear that, engaging with the Data Space Business Alliance is an important activity. Okay, very good. Looking at the two stakeholders, the public and private sector, I think it was, I guess, with the positioning of the and the awareness coming from the public, and I'm impressed with innovation, and I can see the opportunities of the private side. In terms of making this happen now, I think the plans are there. I think the vision is there from both of you. What do you think are the key enablers? And maybe I might go with Rado first to come from the private side, and then we go back to Stefano from the public side.
Yes, so definitely key enabler on our side as a technology company is a necessity to propose and validate more business-oriented cases as an end user, because in general, we cannot assume that companies and organizations will be able to perceive the actual value of having a data space and the participation in a data space. So in that manner, we do believe we need to provide awareness on the real and actual values of the existence of the data spaces. Additionally,
just to follow up on that,
I think that Additionally, I think that dedicated trainings and focused promotion schemes may also be included, alongside with some kind of a grant allow SMEs to adopt the data spaces in what they have as a benefit for them.
Okay, great. So training, proof points, engagement for SMEs, smaller organizations, absolutely. And then Svetlana from the public side, what do you think could be the key enablers? And you have a very clear vision of where you're going. Anything that you think could help with this?
I hope, as I emphasized earlier, short is the digital-minded leadership and data skills. But I just want to say that, first of all, identifying the challenges, risks, and current barriers for building and developing data spaces. Then, decisive and effective actions and practical skills must be undertaken in order to turn these challenges into opportunities. And also, I want to mention another enablers are building important strategic partnerships and selecting a team with diverse and quality expertise. At last but not at least, if I could refer to Robin Sharma, I don't know if you know this person, Robin Sharma, more leaders without a title. We need more leaders without a title. Thank you.
That's a very nice intervention. So we have about a minute left. I'm going to pass it back to Sylvia, who's potentially somebody who can provide skills, can work with SMEs, can be a strategic partner. Back to the Gate Centre, just maybe to round off the session, Sylvia.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we see us as really one of the enablers to happen these data spaces, just not only as a university to educate, to provide different courses and skills, but as a professional training with different organizations. And I see that the big companies like here, the industry, the government, they are already aware of this. They have they're thinking in this direction. So a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to speed up and to go to the maturity levels fast and integrate with Europe. Not to be the followers anymore, but just to be involved in the trend settings in these interesting times we are living now, where a lot of people are cooperating for the future. As I mentioned, only 20% of available data are used so far, so a lot of challenges ahead, a lot of opportunities for better life for us.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sylvia. And I just like to take the moment to thank all the speakers for their great presentations, their great interventions, and also the first discussion. And I think that's the end of this session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.